Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a Should You Talisman episode on the M3A1 Stuart. This is the last of the rank 1 vehicles that we're going to be covering in this series, with us moving on to the 2 remaining rank 2 vehicles in the USA, and then we're going to move on to Germany, which has quite a few. So, before we begin, as per usual with this series, in the description below there will be a few timestamps, so you can skip ahead to the weaponry, armour, mobility, the drivability of the vehicle where we'll take it into a test drive, and of course a test flight in the case of an aircraft, competition, and conclusion. As we've covered Stuarts in this series before, I'm going to be keeping this relatively short. I'm going to be covering mostly the differences between the Stuarts that we've covered so far. Without further ado, let's get in and let's get cracking with this vehicle's weaponry, armour, and mobility. So, as I said, I'm going to be keeping this quite short because obviously this is a vehicle we have basically covered already. Comparing it to the previous Stuart, there isn't really a huge amount of change, at all. The turret is slightly more curved, so it is a bit better protected against flak rounds and things like that, well, anti-aircraft rounds, I should say. But of course, the armor on the side here is still vulnerable, so if someone, for some reason with an AA piece, which has APHE, can't punch through here, they will go for here, or the machine gun port, so this is something to consider still. The armor hasn't really changed on this thing compared to the previous vehicle in this series, which was the M3 Stuart, the M3, the M2A4, I should say. The M3 Stuart that we haven't obviously covered because we haven't got a talisman on that is very similar to this, so that is something to consider, but obviously this has the better turret. So the armor actually did take a nerf. This used to be 50mm of armor and then 38 behind that. It's now 38, so it's about a 12mm difference, which, to be fair, a lot of the guns at this tier can barely crack this as it is, and even with 76mm of penetration, some guns are still going to struggle. Obviously, a lot more guns can go for this gun mantlet now, which means your breach is more vulnerable. But overall, this thing shouldn't be too bad in terms of its overall armor. Overall, though, the hull armor hasn't really changed from what a normal M3 Stuart would be. It's just normal armor. 38mm on the front here, 44 on here, 15.8 on here, so this is a weak spot where much less capable guns can go through. Coming around to the side of the vehicle, it's 25.4 all the way around unless you get to the rear part here. The turret ring is still a vulnerable spot, so this is something to consider when engaging anti-aircraft vehicles. So make sure to consider this when going against them. Coming around to the rear, we have half an inch of armor protecting the rear of the tank and 31 around the sides and rear of the turret. So the turret's a bit better protected, but of course the top of the vehicle is still not very well protected. And as I said, this is still a weak point of the vehicle. Comparing it to the previous Stuarts as well, we lose the machine guns on the side panels here. We also lose the ability to use the hull-mounted machine gun, which, I mean, we're not really crying about that one. We do still have a coaxial 30 cal, which is, for some reason, being very awkward to get to. There we go. This is the 30 caliber machine gun. You'll be seeing a lot more of this machine gun, that's for sure. But it does the job. You don't really get HE in this thing, and the sap round, I think it is, that the M5 gets is god-awful, so don't bother. And, well, you also get a roof-mounted machine gun as well, which is very useful to say the least. But, like I said, the machine guns are not going to be what you're really going to be bothered about. We, of course, do have the 37mm M6 cannon, which has a fully vertical stabilizer, which works up to around 15 miles per hour, and is very, very good at getting the first shot off. Let's put it this way, if you're struggling to get shots off against German tanks, you're not using the stabilizer properly, is all I'll say. This stabilizer is really effective at the lower tiers, and is probably one of the best reasons why the Stuarts are played by a lot of, let's just say, people who like to sit in their basements all day playing M3 Stuarts. Take that information with what you will, but trust me, this thing is very good for a reason. Coming into the shells, of course, I don't really need to go any further because we have covered these kind of shells before. You're going to want to use the upgraded round. This just has overall better capabilities. And of course, coming over to the engine, hasn't really changed much. The weight has slightly gone up, but other than that, I mean, it's not too bad. If I just go over to a regular M2A4 Stuart, they have the same engine, but there is a 1.4 ton difference, which is noticeable. So, like, the M3A4 is still a faster tank, but not by a huge amount, I'll be honest. It's nothing where you'd say, oh, the M3A1's slow. Far from it. Of course, the gearbox is still acceptable. I mean, 36 miles an hour forward is nothing to sneeze at. The reverse gear I wish was better, but well, that's why later light tanks learned that lesson, that's for sure. Overall, though, this thing is not too bad in terms of its overall armor for a light tank, but well, just don't expect it to be brawling with anything. Obviously, the gun mount is your best bet in a hold-down position, and of course, the gun will be able to crack pretty much anything that you come across. There will be exceptions to that rule, but you've got the mobility to outflank them, so make sure to use that. Anyway, let's move on to a test drive, and let's take a look at how this vehicle drives. See you shortly. And welcome to the test drive. As mentioned, this thing is still very quick, even though it is about 1.5 tons heavier than your standard Stuart. But if I put it into CC1 here, as you can see, this thing is perfectly capable of firing its gun on the move. Once you bump it up to CC2 and you get past 15 miles per hour, the stabilizer does deactivate. But chances are you're going to be coming to a stop when getting this gun on target anyway. Now look how quick you can get this gun firing. It's actually kind of ridiculous how good the Stuart is at low gears. If I'm not exactly aiming very well, but that's not the point. The point is that having that stabilizer compared to the earlier M3A4 Stuart's stabilizer really opens this thing up. Like, there's no competition. Comparing it to a vehicle like the Panzer IV, you have most combat advantages over the Panzer IV. You have a better gun than them, you've got better mobility than them, you don't have better armor than them, well in some places you do, but just pretty much overall, this thing is all about using that stabilizer, using that mobility, and just making sure this tank can do a lot of work. Now obviously, I recommend spading the tank if you're gonna ever pop a talisman on this thing. But, like I said, it's something that is just a lot of fun, really. And even when you're mucking around and deliberately driving the vehicle into a poor spot, like I am here, because it's so light and got so much horsepower, it can get itself out of a lot of sticky situations. It's fast enough to get to caps, it's fast enough with its gun to deal with any target that you come across. And with a decent crew, you've got a 3-second reload on a really punchy 37mm. What more can I say about this thing? It's very nice to drive, very nicely all-rounded with its capabilities. And like I said, I've seen quite a few players that have played this thing over 2,000 times. Fair enough, they suck as actual players because they just do the same tricks over and over again. They're very easy to predict, those kinds of people. But like I said, it's the fact that this thing is loved by so many people that, as I say, what more can you ask for from this thing? Anyway, I'll leave you to it, and I will see you all in the competition. See you shortly. And welcome back to the hangar. As previously mentioned, I'm going to be keeping this short. This is something where we don't really need to go into any more detail, because obviously we've covered Stuarts on this series before, so again, going to be trying to keep this quite short. The only real competition for this vehicle is the M3 Stuart, which is, it trades a couple of things, nothing major for the lower BR. The M22, which does trade armor, but is of course a smaller target and is easier to hide. It's also faster, so it just depends on what you want, really. In terms of a TD, as I mentioned before, the M8 HMC and the M3 GMC are excellent choices, and just overall are really fun and just nice to play. I took out the M3 GMC for a daily and got up 8 kills without even trying, because I needed what I needed was, I think it was required number of kills in a match, so I took this alongside a M3A1 and pretty much just cleaned house in this, jumped in a plane and got the task done. It was quite easy, actually. But like I said, it's just something down to you. Do not ever talisman this thing. It is not very good in the slightest. Its twin 50s are nice, but why do we need the 37? It's just not very good, and it recoils like a bitch, let's put it that way. And that brings me to the conclusion. See, told you it'd be short. This is definitely one where if you are wanting to talisman a low tier vehicle in the US tech tree, by far this is the choice. Like, I'm not exaggerating. The closest thing to this that I would say is fun level is the M8 HMC, but that is very user dependent. Obviously, I would say it's tied with the M22 Locust, but to put it simply, this is one of the best damn talismans that you're ever going to have if you ever want one. And even if you don't want to talisman it, you can buy the US starter pack and get yourself the premium one, which gives you extra SL whilst you're playing it. So there's no real point to like. It's the fact that this is just a better choice in terms of price, especially on half off. You'd really have to be daft to put a talisman on this. Like, if you want a bit more use out of the Stuart. But if you're just looking for general use, popping a talisman on this is probably going to be the best decision you ever make for low tiers. Next up in the series, we are moving on to rank 2, and we're also featuring our first anti-aircraft vehicle in this series. I don't think we have many to come up in this series, to be honest. I think this is one of like 2, if memory serves, but we'll soon get to that, of course. But this one will probably just be more of a bit of a meme-ish one, to be honest, because, well, if you're talismaning SPAAs, yeah. Unless it's the automatic or the BTR ZD, we'll cover that, though, at some point. Anyway, we'll leave you to it for today. Really hope you enjoyed seeing the M3A1 in action, and I'll see you all on the next one.